Alrighty, welcome in everyone to just another edition of Just Another College Football Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It's Tuesday, December 2nd around here, and we got some games to pick. We got to pick all of the conference championships that are going on this weekend, all over the FBS. We will go to, obviously, the power conferences first. We'll work through the ACC, the Big 12, the SEC, and the Big 10, number 1 against number 2 up there in Indianapolis, and then we'll move on. We'll get to the group of 5 teams before I just have some things I want to talk about before we get to the playoff rankings tonight, and they'll be applicable tomorrow, so if you're watching this a little bit late, no worries about that. Just a couple of things I want to talk about, a couple of teams I want to talk about that G5 spot, whether or not it should be there, all of that different type of stuff before we get into probably the most consequential rankings of the entire year. Obviously, the final ones are going to be massive, but these are huge in terms of figuring out just what they're thinking going into this one. But we got to start with what's happening in between the white lines. So much talk outside the white lines over the last couple of weeks. It's time to talk about the big ones and conference championships coming up this weekend. We got to talk about the power conferences first, and I feel like we should start with the weirdest one of the bunch. Duke plays Virginia in Charlotte for the ACC title. That is going to be Saturday at 8 p.m. Virginia favored by only 2.5 in this football game, over under at 57.5. Somehow, some way, Duke found their way to Charlotte, and they have a chance of winning the ACC title at 7-5. Absolutely insane. Anyone claiming that Miami should be in this game, even more insane. I'll be totally honest. But at the end of the day, Duke is here, and we'll see what happens. I think it's one of those debates. Will they be in with a win? I've said pretty firmly that I don't think they should. Obviously, if something changes in the group of 5, and we'll talk about those games in a second, if something changes there, then maybe Duke could jump in as that 12 seed. As of right now, if everything goes chalk this weekend, I would lean towards Duke not being in. Even with a win here, maybe if they win by 30 points. I'm totally convinced, but at the end of the day, I'm leaning towards Duke being on the outside looking in regardless of the result in this one. But these two teams really couldn't be any different on the offensive side of the ball. Duke is a very pass-first team. Darian Mensah has been incredible for them in his 1 year, and they paid a pretty penny to get him, so he's really lived up to the billing in a lot of ways. They haven't been able to run the ball. And the issue with that is when you can't run the ball, you usually don't have the openings that you usually have on the back end that Darian Mensah has taken full advantage of. In the games that Darian Mensah has really passed the ball all around the yard, Nate Shepherd's had a great day. And that's why I think he might be the single most important player for Duke in this football game. He's got to find openings. It's a top 25 rush defense on the other side for Virginia. It's not going to be easy to, but unless you want to force Darian Mensah to go for 350 for you to stay in this football game, you got to get a little bit from Nate Shepherd. He has progressed incredibly throughout the years. A very, very talented kid, but he's got to find a couple of openings in this football game. Duke, number 12 in the country in pass offense, 95th in rush offense. Virginia, 34th in the country in pass offense, 53rd in rush offense. So a little bit more even-keeled if you're Virginia with a little downtick in the rush game. That being said, they're incredibly, incredibly talented at the running back position. Jamari Taylor can carry them to a win. Point blank period. Duke gives up about 140 on the ground per game. There's an opening there. If Jamari Taylor can be a difference maker in this one, Chandler Morris can have all the openings in the world, and Trell Harris can make big-time catches, and this game will kind of be a rout pretty quickly. If they can't, and this thing goes fully in Chandler Morris's hands, then you might have a little bit of an issue. It's a very good pass defense. On the other side, a very opportunistic one. You could very well force a couple of mistakes, and then this game gets sketchy in a hurry where you don't want to put the ball in Darian Mensah's hands. I don't want to put an exact number on it, but at the end of the day, you want to make sure that guy is on the sidelines as much as possible. When he gets into a rhythm passing, very few defenses, especially in the ACC, are going to be able to slow that kid down. So that's something to keep in mind here. If Duke is able to pass the ball early, it might be hard to slow that kid down at the end of the day for Virginia, but really like this matchup. I really do. I think there's a lot of people kind of poo-pooing this matchup. It's a ridiculous conference. I'm not saying the ACC has been incredible this year. It's been very weird. It's been a little bit down. The quality of team overall is not where it used to be. I don't think there's an argument for that. This Virginia team's been pretty darn special. It's been really, really fun to watch what they've been able to do. Tony Elliott putting together a great team. Chandler Morris taking that next step in his progression. And then you got a Duke team that's just the ultimate agent of chaos in a time in college football where it's got to be welcome, right? We got to be a little bit weird. We got to be a little bit different around this time. But the only advantage that I see from a positional perspective, at least, is at the quarterback. I do believe Duke has the better quarterback in this game. I don't think he's going to get the help around him that is necessary. I think Virginia does a much better job of balancing out this offense, giving Chandler Morris easy answers, and I think Virginia is going to be able to win this football game. I'll say Virginia gets the win here 31-24. They handle business. I think Duke is going to be able to push them in this game. I think Darius Mensah makes enough plays to keep this one interesting. But at the end of the day, I'm going to pick Virginia. They've been consistent as can be all season. If Duke wins, we'll talk about what that could possibly mean. I tend to believe it will mean two group of five teams in that playoff, and that might make some people mad. But again, something we'll talk about later in the show. Moving forward to the Big 12, that one's at noon on Saturday. Going to be a rematch between BYU and number 5 Texas Tech. Texas Tech getting 12.5 points here. That's quite the margin, and I understand it. The first time these two met, Texas Tech rolled BYU 29-7. There was no opening for the BYU run game at all throughout that football game. Texas Tech just kind of went about their business. There wasn't much of a question about which way that game was going from the absolute jump. So Texas Tech being favored by 12.5 isn't all that crazy when you really think about it. This is such a funny game to me because I have the utmost respect for what BYU has been able to do this year. I think they're a remarkable team. I think they've done incredible things this year, and we'll talk about what they mean for the playoff here in a little bit in the show. But at the end of the day, whenever Texas Tech is playing a football game, particularly against other Big 12 teams, that defensive line is just too much for the vast, vast majority of teams, and BYU has shown that it was a little bit too much for them the first time around. It's both a great thing for Texas Tech and makes breaking down some of their games not super interesting. Because here's the reality. If BYU's offensive line can't win that matchup, the game's over. Texas Tech is going to dominate this game. Bear Bachmeier is going to get hit by David Sanders over and over, or David Bailey, over and over and over again, and you are going to have a really long day. Jacob Rodriguez is going to make plays. Lee Hunter is going to be a beast. Romello Height's going to get in there. There's going to be too many guys to deal with. If the BYU offense can find a way to bypass this defensive line, more power to them. That's not something that they're really capable of doing, or something they haven't done this year. They are capable of doing it, I suppose. I do think Bear Bachmeier has gotten much better as a passer. He has won them games as a passer throughout this season. I just don't think this is the team that you're going to be able to step back and throw balls down the field. You're going to have to kick it out and hope that they don't tackle in the open field. That's really tough against this team. They have dudes all over the field that are incredibly good at helping out in the run game, really good at coming down in the screen game and making plays. It's just a defense that's really hard to game plan against, especially when you don't have that prerequisite talent on the offensive line. That's just the reality. That's why when Texas Tech gets to the playoff, we're going to have a very interesting conversation, and I think Texas Tech should be in regardless of a win or a loss here. Want to make that very clear from the jump. But let's say BYU can play even on the offensive line and defensive line, or even they lose that battle, but it's not quite as aggressive as the one they did before. I think there's three things that you have to do to be able to get a win here and to be able to kind of bypass all of the advantage that Texas Tech just objectively does have from a size, talent, and physicality perspective. You need turnovers. I think you have to be at least +2 in the turnover category to be able to win this football game. You have to force a couple of turnovers from Baron Morton, from a couple of these guys. Maybe you get a couple of fumbles. Just muck up the game early on. Be up in that turnover margin early on and hopefully hold on to it the rest of the game. Parker Kingston's got to make a play in the punt return game. Whether that's putting them in plus territory when catching the ball at the 10, you get a 40-yard return to put them at midfield, whether it's getting a punt return going to the house like he did last week, whatever that looks like. Just he needs to be a difference maker when the Texas Tech defense doesn't have a chance to stop him. That's the biggest part of that piece of it. And then one or two big runs from LJ Martin. You have to be able to get LJ Martin a couple of creases and allow that guy to get going. He doesn't have elite breakaway speed. He's probably not going to break one for 80 yards. but you have to be able to make them respect that run game and then open up a couple of chances for Chase Roberts, for Parker Kingston in the pass game. If you can't do that, if you can't win the turnover battle, if you can't get a couple of big plays in the special teams play, if you can't get LJ Martin just a couple of burst plays to get this offense going, it's going to be a really, really long day. I don't mean to poo-poo this game. I don't mean to downplay it. It's going to be an awesome one. And I have all the respect in the world for Kalani Sitake and BYU. In fact, could be Penn State's head coach. A lot to talk about tomorrow with that. But at the end of the day, this BYU team, I just can't trust that in the last month or so, or over the last 2 months, I suppose, since they last played, I can't trust that offensive line has made up that gap. It was a massive gap last time around. I think Texas Tech still has the pretty comfortable advantage here. I do think BYU plays better football. I think Texas Tech wins this one 28-17. I think BYU finds a way to manufacture offense just enough. I think Bear Bachmeier's played much better football. But at the end of the day, that Texas Tech defense is so far and away the most physically impressive and from a talent perspective, is far and away the best group in the entire conference. I don't see that changing on Saturday. So I'm going to lean towards Texas Tech here. I feel pretty comfortable with that one. That's nothing against BYU. It's just all the respect in the world towards Texas Tech. Number 4, Georgia versus number 10, Alabama. You can run from it, but it's inevitable. These two teams in Atlanta at the end of the year for the SEC championship, it's just what happens. Texas was able to sneak in there with a very favorable schedule a year ago, but at the end of the day, they found their way back to even. It is going to be the Bulldogs against the Crimson Tide. A lot of people hate it. I get I have UGA over my shoulder, so who am I to talk? I love it. I think these two teams facing off in these massive moments over and over and over again is fascinating to watch because you get to see who I consider to be the very best coach in the entire country in Kirby Smart try to overcome that last mountain. Not to say that last mountain. He's got plenty of things that he wants to do going on the rest of his career, but this is a mental hurdle. Can he get over it this time around, hoist another SEC championship for the second year in a row, and be on his way to a CFP as probably the 2 or 3 seed, depending on how that Big Ten championship goes. But at the end of the day, this is such an interesting matchup because about a month ago, about 2 weeks ago, really, I would have said these are two of the best teams in the country. These offenses are going to get after each other. And then they put on the performances they did last week. And really, Bama, it's gone back a little bit further, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But neither of these teams played great offense a week ago. Georgia Tech did a great job of shutting down Georgia. Alabama has been shaky for about a month here. And I think a lot of that, we've talked about it on here, is just you're putting too much on Ty Simpson's shoulders. You have been pretty much all year, and he carried you to a lot of wins throughout that time, including the one, I think, in Athens when he went 8 for 8 on the first 8 third downs. He was absolutely lethal in that football game. He won you that one. I'm not sure he can do that in this football game. Georgia has taken massive steps forward on the defensive side of the ball. I think the run game has much improved. The caveat to that, and the big thing in this game, which sounds crazy to say this is the big thing in this game, is Georgia center going to play? Drew Bobo has to play in this football game. He is a massively important player to this offense. Outside of Gunnar Stockton, I'd say that's the single most important player, and you can imagine that last name has a lot to do with it. This guy understands this offense better than anyone on that Georgia roster. He calls out protections incredibly well. Great communicator, knows everything that you need to know to compete against all of the teams in the country and execute that offense at a very, very high level. Not to mention you got Tim Keenan on the other side of the football. You need that guy out there. Even if he's out there, I don't know how close to 100% he is. He had the laceration on his hand, and then he had something else come up against Georgia Tech. We'll see what that looks like. We'll see if he even goes. I'd probably bet on him not going, if I'm being totally honest, but that is a huge loss for this football team. They got to find run lanes on the outside because you try to run into Tim Keenan the entire afternoon, it's going to be really, really tough to do. In fact, if you don't watch college football too much, or you're just getting into it, just watch 96 on Alabama the entire afternoon. It's a special thing to watch. There is nothing like what this kid can do in the run game, and it's not all that interesting. It's not all that sexy. It's really good football. There's no doubt about that. For the Bama offense, I've said it before, I'll say it again, it can't all be tie. And they did a relatively good job of this against Auburn early in that game, got Jamarian Miller going, got these guys got the run game going enough. What we talked about with Texas in that going up into that A&M game, you don't have to be special. You don't have to do incredible things. You don't have to go for 175 yards and 3 scores on the ground. You got to give this guy enough. You got to give him enough time. You have to push enough linebackers back into coverage or bring guys up into the box so we can throw behind him. You have to be able to at least take a little bit off his shoulders. The other part of it, their wide receiver is going to have to win one-on-ones on the outside. Georgia obviously mixes and matches what their coverage is going to be depending on the outcome, but they love putting Ellis Robinson out there. He's a very talented one-on-one corner. He's going to get Jeremy Bernard a lot. He's going to get Isaiah Horton. He might get Ryan Williams just a little bit. Been kind of quiet in that Alabama offense lately, and I don't see that changing really throughout this season. That being said, whenever that guy gets the ball in his hands, he is a danger to make a big-time play. There's no doubt about that. So it is going to be a really fun battle. I think both these teams have changed a ton since the last time they've played. I think Georgia's made more progress since the last time they played. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I think Alabama's made great progress on the defensive side of the ball, on the offensive side of the ball, especially in the run game. I think they've done really well. Is there a mental hurdle here? There's no doubt about it. Absolutely. Kirby Smart has something going on with the Alabama Crimson Tide. It might be because I'm feeling myself just a little bit by picking Ohio State over Michigan. Not to say that was an incredible pick or anything, but just to say that was a little bit of a mental hurdle breaker as well for Ryan Day. I think Kirby Smart the third time around against Kalen DeBoer does what he did to Buster Faulkner the third time around. I think he's going to have his defense ready. I think Gunnar Stockton is going to be ready to make plays. I think Georgia's offense just has more options in the way that they can attack you, and I think they're going to win this football game. I think Georgia wins 27-23. I think they get Alabama on a rematch, actually 1-0 in rematches against Alabama in a specific season, but at the end of the day, I believe they're going to win this football game. I think this team has come a really long way, especially on the defensive side of the football. I think Ty Simpson's going to have a lot more questions to answer, and I don't think the guys around him are going to be able to help him enough for it to make a difference. I think Georgia wins 27-23 and wins their second straight SEC title. Number 1, Ohio State against number 2, Indiana over there in Indianapolis. It's going to be awesome. This is the one. This is the one that we've been waiting on for quite some time. Now, Indiana came into the season, I think people were skeptical is probably the best word of it. I don't think they were necessarily fully doubting. Now, I had my questions, my fair share of questions coming into this year, but for the vast majority of this football season, this has been the one. We've all looked forward and said, it's going to be Indiana, Ohio State. It's going to be 2 undefeated teams at the end of this thing. It's going to be Fernando Mendoza and Julian Sayin walking in, probably competing for the Heisman Trophy. Now, we'll talk about that later on. I think Diego Pavia might have that thing locked up. Again, we'll talk about it later on. But at the end of the day, this one's going to be special. There's no two ways about that. And the funny thing about it is, Ohio State ran away with that Michigan game. They handled them. They played their football. They look incredibly, incredibly impressive and have every single week of the entire season. Indiana did see the blueprint early on in that game against Michigan. Early on in that game, they found a way to run the ball, did Michigan. They found a way to make one mistake from Julian Sayin. The only problem was they got 3 points, and they didn't get 7. If Indiana can get 7, if they can mirror the results that Michigan was able to do early on in that game, they could be up 14-0 before Ohio State knows it. Now, I don't know if it'll go that smoothly. I don't know if Julian Sayin will give the ball to them the way he did against Michigan. I'm just saying there is a world there where you can jump on this team and it not be a one-possession game after it. It be a 2-possession game, and then Ohio State's really playing from behind and really starting to push and maybe really in a corner where last week they were pushed into a corner a little bit but had plenty of escape hatches and took one of them. But at the end of the day, there is a world here where Indiana can jump all over them, and maybe Ohio State is pushed more into a corner than they have been all year, and then we see what happens. The only way that's going to happen, and the only way they're able to even hold on to a possible 14-point lead in this hypothetical that I'm talking about, You got to get after Julian Sane. If you do not touch Julian Sane in this football game, he will kill you. Point blank, period. That kid is too accurate. He's too talented. He's too smart to not kill you. Michigan got there 0 times. They had 0 pressures the entire football game. We saw what happened. In time, that kid tore them to pieces. He's going to do the same to you. I think you're more equipped to get after the quarterback. I think you can do more with Aiden Fisher and some of those linebackers. I think you can bring D'Angelo Pons or Amari Farrell off the outside. I think you have really talented guys like Michael Kamara on the front that can make some big-time plays. If you don't get after him, if you don't force the ball out of his hands quickly, if you allow these explosive plays, the explosive posts and deep overs and things to develop long-term, you're in trouble. They're going to hit big-time plays, and you're probably not scoring more than maybe 21 on this defense. You have to find a way to get after Julian Sane, at least force the ball out of his hands quickly. He can be accurate as long as it's 10 yards and in, and you are tackling the second that you touch someone, he's on the ground, and you can make sure that you are keeping them in front of the chains and forcing 14-play drives, not 7 or 5-play drives. It's a tough thing to do. It's a remarkably tough thing to do, especially with how good that Ohio State offensive line is. You got to find a way to do it if you want to win this football game. Also, you got to stop Bo Jackson. Just to add a little bit more fun to your plate, Bo Jackson's now a freak. He's played incredible football last week against Michigan. He was remarkable, and if he finds a way to get going early in this football game, you're not going to have a chance to get after Julian Sane, and we know how that goes. You are not going to have a chance to win this football game. So you got to find a way to slow down the run. You got to find a way to get after Julian Sane and force the ball out quickly, and you have to tackle really well. Point blank, period. If you are going to stop this Ohio State offense, those are the things you plainly have to do, and that doesn't even get to the defense. That is the very best unit in the entire country and has been the entirety of the year. I don't know, man. Indiana needs to find a way to put on a show on the outside in this football game. Elijah Surratt needs to win one-on-one battles routinely. Omar Cooper needs to win one-on-one battles routinely. They need to find a way to get these running backs out on the edge in. They got to make some of the best tacklers in the country miss. It's really hard to do. That's why none of the teams that Ohio State has played thus far have been within 3 scores other than the team they played in the first week of the season. It's tough. It's really tough to beat this football team. I think Indiana's a great team, and I think they have the ability to win the national title if things fall into place for them. But at the end of the day, I'm not betting against Ohio State. I'm not picking against this team right now. I'll pick them 27-17. I think Indiana might score a late touchdown, might make this look a little bit nicer than it is. I just think it's going to be really hard for that offense to get moving against this defense. I think the run game will not be what it has been for the majority of the year for Indiana. I think the offensive line is good. I think that Ohio State defensive line is terrifying. So I'm going to lean towards Ohio State here. I'd love to see Indiana pull this thing off and totally flip this thing on its head, make people think that Indiana's the new favorite and Ohio State is old news. It'd be incredible to watch. And I would be lying if I said I wasn't kind of rooting for that. But at the end of the day, if I'm picking one of these teams, I'm picking the Buckeyes. Ohio State's been incredible this year. I think they finish the postseason with a Big Ten championship and then move on to the ultimate goal of a national title in the playoff, very likely as the number 1 seed overall. But incredible Power 4 games that we're going to get this upcoming weekend. People will tell you that these games don't matter. And yes, a couple of these teams that are going to be in it, they're going to be in it regardless. And we'll talk about some of that later on in the show. Ohio State, Indiana, you're both in the playoff. There's no doubt about that. Indiana badly wants a Big Ten title. Ohio State badly wants to get back on top of this conference and prove that they are the class of this conference after Michigan and then Oregon, a new team, came in and beat them in the regular season and then took a trophy that they felt was theirs. These teams want it. I understand the playoff doesn't really change one way or the other. These teams badly want these games, and I think we should hype them up like we should in their conference championships. Let's give them a little bit of love. But at the end of the day, they're going to be incredible matchups. Cannot wait to get into those. But we got to talk about the group of 5. We got to give the group of 5 some love before we get finish off with our predictions this week. We'll get into the group of 5 championship predictions right after this. So stick with us.